Hello everyone, I decided to do my project on the likelihood of black women versus white women and their likelihood of developing cervical cancer, and if science or systemic racism is more of a contributing factor for either one of those races. So I decided that I wanted to jump right into the statistics, and I wanted to really look at black women versus white women when it came to cervical cancer. I wanted to look at all the statistics in all the ways. I wanted to see who had more screenings to start with, who got more follow-up care, what kind of treatment people got versus if they were a white woman or a black woman, and I really wanted to see what role racism played in contributing to these studies and statistics, if any at all. So I decided. So I was able to find 3 great articles on the Harkness Library that had really detailed investigations and studies and a huge amount of statistics. So one of the things that I really thought was interesting was that black women were more likely to get the initial screenings done, but they weren't likely at all to have any follow-up testing or any follow-up care because they weren't alerted of any of the findings from the first screenings. For example, if there was tumors found, HPV found, or any other sort of STD, STI, they weren't made aware of it. However, the white women were alerted of findings. If they had cancer or suspicious findings that could have been cancer, HPV, other STDs, they were made aware and they were scheduled for follow-up care, follow-up screenings, and routine checkups. The black women, however, even if they found something worse, weren't even alerted. They had no knowledge of the findings and had no chance of following up care because they truly had no knowledge or access to the information. So I was able to find. We know that most things aren't a perfect science, including science itself. So when we look into radiation and chemotherapy as a way to prevent cancer from spreading or rid cancer out of the human body, we know that it's not 100% effective, unfortunately. We do, however, know that surgery is a more effective way of healing the body from cancer. This is because we go into the body directly and cut the cancer from the source to help prevent it from spreading and remove it completely, or try to. So, I found it very interesting when I was looking at one of the studies I found on the Harkness Library that scope was really narrowed on Maryland itself, but there was a large difference in what black women versus white women had access to. Unfortunately, with what I know about our country and how the black race is treated in our country across the board, I wasn't really all that surprised with what I found. I found that white women were twice as more likely to go straight to surgery when found that they had cervical cancer, while black women were made to go through the timely, exhausting, and excruciating treatments of chemotherapy or radiation. They weren't offered surgery as their first option, while white women were and weren't expected to go through chemo or radiation if they chose to. We know that most things. So we might not know who would get or who wouldn't get cervical cancer when it comes to race. But what we do know is that race does play a factor in how treatment plays out. However, that being said, we know that equality in the medical field when it comes to being a patient has improved over decades, but it's still far from perfect. Hopefully, over the upcoming years, quickly, we can see these things even out and be more equal across the board. Hopefully, everybody will be able to get pre-screenings as cautionaries and get the follow-up care they need, regardless of their race or anything else. So that brings us to the question, is it science and fate, or is it embedded racism that causes us to have this huge gap in between white versus black women and their fate with cervical cancer? Now, we have no proof that you're more likely to get cervical cancer because you're black, but we do have proof that you're less likely to get the care you need because you're black, unfortunately. So, what we see is, what that brings us to is, I guess, why? Not just because of racism itself, that people have meanness and hate in their heart, but why else? Why is it set up like that? So, on that note, it brings us to this point. Our country has always had this ingrained racism built into our society. We may have abolished slavery and made segregation illegal, but we still have this across the board. There's not equality. We see a huge gap in poverty, race to race, blacks being much lower than whites. Therefore, black women don't have access to health care. They don't have access to transportation to get to the hospital, or even to be able to afford copays or anything of that sort to get to the doctors. So that's where we see that black women struggle getting the health care they need due to things like poverty and lack of equality when it comes to income and wages, and therefore are more likely to struggle with things when they have a diagnosis as serious as cancer. So furthermore, when we look more into the study I looked into by Edgar P. Simard, he looked into the disparities between black and white women with cervical cancer and narrowed the scope on age brackets. And we did see that women 50 to 64 and 65 and up had other reasons other than just financial ones for not going to the doctors and being more likely to have cervical cancer because of lack of screening and lack of treatment, etc. They lived in a time like Henrietta Lacks where segregation was legal and malpractice was common when it came to the black race. So unfortunately, they have more complex reasons for not wanting to go to the doctors due to past trauma or past association with friends, family, etc. that made it so they weren't really as eager to go to the doctors. And can you blame them? So that brings us to the question. So furthermore, when we look more At least we've made some improvements, though. When looking at that same study, we found that women back in 1975 to 1979 were more likely across the board, abundantly clear, and were much more likely to have cervical cancer if they were black, starting from age 18 all the way up. Now, we saw in 2005 to 2009, that study, the data collected, was that the only difference between black and white women was the 50 to 64 and 65 and up group. And again, I touched on that in the last slide. They have their own reasons for really not even want to go to the doctor. So, and it is still based on racism. Whether it's current or past, it's still the reason why. So we need to look into that more to see if there's something we could do to help them feel more comfortable with getting the screening they need and making sure that it's provided to them and they're made aware of it. So we can see how this all ties directly into Henrietta Lacks. She too was a black woman with cancer who was very reluctant to seek medical care. It was because she knew that she didn't have the funds to pay for it, and she knew that the care she was going to receive probably wasn't going to be the best. She also knew that it was a long ride to get there, and that it was going to put her family in kind of a bind, where they would have to drive a distance each day to get her to and from doctor's appointments, and it wasn't going to be fun for anyone. We know that Henrietta waited a long time to go to the doctors, and because of that, her cancer was so far advanced and was growing at such a rapid rate and spreading so quickly that the chances of her surviving probably weren't very likely back then anyway. However, we know that because of her fears, that's what kept her from going. And if those fears were non-existent, and if they weren't existent today, the likelihood of black women being able to beat cancer of any kind, including cervical cancer, would be far greater. Unfortunately, even if Henrietta had gone to the doctors at the very beginning, when she noticed her first symptoms, or better yet, if she had access to precautionary screening like everybody should be offered today, we don't even know if she would have survived still. Because in the studies that I had mentioned before, the one based in Maryland, where black women are far less likely to even be offered surgery, and white women are twice as likely to get surgery and skip radiation and chemotherapy first, we know that Henrietta's cells and cancer were so unlike others and growing so fast that radiation and chemotherapy might not have even done what we needed it to do to help her. So, unfortunately, it's another example of how her being black set her up for the awful and terrible death that she experienced. This just goes to show how the book, Henrietta Lacks, and how today's current life is still so similar in a lot of ways. We may have made great strides legally in trying to help force equality across the board amongst all humans, but unfortunately we have a lot of work to do inside the hearts and inside the minds of many Americans to help prevent things like this. White privilege is real, and my point being is Henrietta might not have lived back then just because of the fact that she was black. We have proof no matter what way you look at it. But if she was white, she very well could have. Same as today. The same outcomes could occur because of the facts that we have. Black women do not have access to the care they need. So we can see how this all ties directly Henrietta waited a long. To summarize, it is not clear whether or not black women are more naturally susceptible to being diagnosed with cervical cancer. However, it is very clear that black women are less likely to get the treatment they deserve and get less of quality treatment than white women when it comes to treating cervical cancer. Black women are less likely to even get their test results back when they have significant findings, and white women are more likely to go straight to surgery and not even have to wait around with chemotherapy or radiation, while black women are only given that as an option. It's clear to me that things like racism are the leading cause in why black women have higher statistics when it comes to things such as cervical cancer. To summarize, it is not I just want to take this minute to throw in a quick learning opportunity. I hope that this presentation helps everybody realize the need for things like equality. I hope this encourages people to help educate others, to help treat others equally across the board, no matter what they look like, who they are, how they walk, how they talk, what they identify as. I hope that people learn to treat others just with equality and love. Kindness goes a long ways. And just to go off of that quickly, I just want to add one more little snippet about how it's very important to get these cancer screenings early. Things like funding Planned Parenthood are crucial to women. It is really important that we get these screenings, all women of all ages, all races, everything. I really hope that people can pass this on and help educate others. Let's do it for ourselves, our sisters, our daughters, our mothers, our coworkers, our friends, peers, just the plain human race. We need it. I hope we can pass this along and get a better positive idea behind things like this. We really need it. I just want to take this minute and just to close out here. Here are my citations. These are the citations to the 3 great articles I found on the Harkness Library. If you're interested in finding out any more about this, go on and check out these articles. They have some great visuals and a huge amount of statistics right in the articles themselves. I had to keep it short and sweet and keep it to 10 slides, so I wasn't able to go too crazy with it, but I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day. Stay safe. To close out